Some secrets don't just break your heart, they rewrite your entire history. I'm talking about the kind of discovery that makes you question every single moment you thought you understood. Every smile you believed was genuine, every word you took as truth. My name is Margaret Ellen Hartley, and I'm 74 years old. What I'm about to share with you happened on a cold February morning in 1973, when a single envelope tucked inside my husband's Bible turned my world completely upside down. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Now let me take you back to where it all began, not to that February morning just yet, but to the summer of 1956 when I first laid eyes on Robert James Hartley. I was barely 19 years old, working as a secretary at the county courthouse in Riverside, a quiet town nestled in the rolling hills of northern Kentucky. My life was simple then, predictable in the way young lives often are when you've never known real heartbreak or complicated love. I lived with my parents in a modest brick house on Chestnut Avenue, helped my mother with the gardening on weekends, attended Sunday services at First Baptist Church, and dreamed of the kind of romance I read about in the novels I borrowed from the library. Robert walked into the courthouse on a Thursday afternoon in late June. I remember the exact day because it was my birthday, and my coworker Patricia had brought in a small chocolate cake to share during our lunch break. The remains of that cake still sat on the break room table when he appeared at my desk, tall and broad-shouldered with dark hair that fell across his forehead in a way that made him look younger than his 28 years. He wore a gray suit that had seen better days, and he carried a leather briefcase that was scuffed at the corners. But his eyes, those deep brown eyes, they held something I couldn't quite name then. A sadness maybe, or a weariness that seemed too heavy for someone not yet 30. He needed to file some property documents, he explained in a voice that was surprisingly gentle for such a large man. His father had passed away 3 months earlier, and he was settling the estate. I processed his paperwork with trembling hands, though I tried to hide my nervousness behind professional efficiency. He noticed anyway. "You seem young to be working in such a serious place," he said with a small smile that didn't quite reach those sad eyes. "Most girls your age are thinking about parties and dates, not legal documents and filing systems." "I'm good at what I do," I replied, perhaps a bit more defensively than I intended. "Age doesn't determine capability, Mr. Hartley." His smile widened then, becoming more genuine. "I can see that, Mississippi." He glanced at the nameplate on my desk. "Miss Brennan. I apologize if I offended you. That wasn't my intention at all." Something about his sincerity disarmed me completely. "I'm Margaret," I said, softening my tone. "And I turned 19 today, so perhaps I'm not as young as I look." "Happy birthday, Margaret," he said, and the way he spoke my name made something flutter in my chest. "That's worth celebrating. Have you made any special plans?" "Just cake with my family tonight," I admitted. "Nothing too exciting." He nodded thoughtfully, collected his receipt for the filing fee, and turned to leave. Then he paused at the door and looked back at me. "Would you allow me to buy you a birthday dinner, Margaret? Nothing improper, I assure you. Just a meal at Porter's Diner down the street. I'd welcome the company, and you deserve more than just cake on your birthday." I should have said no. A proper young lady in 1956 didn't accept dinner invitations from strange men, even handsome ones with sad eyes and gentle voices. But something in his loneliness called to something in me. Some part of myself I hadn't known existed until that moment. I found myself saying yes before I could think better of it. We met at Porter's Diner at 6 o'clock that evening. I'd gone home first to change out of my work dress into something prettier, a pale yellow sundress with white flowers that my mother had made for me the previous spring. Robert was already waiting in a booth by the window when I arrived, and he stood up as I approached, a gesture of old-fashioned courtesy that made my heart skip. Over meatloaf and mashed potatoes, over apple pie and coffee, he told me about himself in careful, measured words that I later realized were edited versions of a more complicated truth. He was a surveyor, he said, working for a company that mapped property lines and assessed land values across 3 counties. He'd grown up in Riverside but had been away for several years, working in Tennessee and Virginia before returning after his father's illness. He had no siblings, no close family left now that his father was gone. His mother had died when he was just a boy, only 7 years old, from pneumonia that the country doctor couldn't cure. "And what about you, Margaret?" he asked, redirecting the conversation away from himself with a skill I didn't recognize then as deliberate evasion. "Tell me about the girl who processes legal documents with such serious efficiency on her 19th birthday." I laughed, suddenly self-conscious. "There's not much to tell, really. I grew up here, graduated from Riverside High last year. Got this job through my father's connection to Judge Morrison. I'm the middle child of 5, which means I learned early how to be independent and invisible at the same time." "Invisible?" He shook his head. "I don't think you could be invisible if you tried, Margaret. There's a light in you that draws people in." I felt my cheeks flush hot. "You barely know me, Mr. Hartley." "That's true," he admitted. "But I'd like to know you better if you'd allow it. May I see you again?" That dinner was the first of many. Throughout that summer and into the autumn, Robert courted me with a quiet intensity that both thrilled and puzzled me. He took me to movies at the Palace Theater, to Sunday afternoon picnics by the river, to church socials where he was polite but distant with everyone except me. He met my parents and siblings, impressing my father with his knowledge of land surveying, and winning over my mother with his impeccable manners and obvious devotion to me. But there were things about Robert that didn't quite add up. Pieces of his story that didn't fit together smoothly when I tried to assemble them in my mind during the quiet moments before sleep. He never spoke about friends from his youth, never mentioned anyone he'd known before leaving Riverside. When I asked about his time in Tennessee, he gave vague answers about different surveying projects but never specific details about places or people. He lived alone in a small rented house on the edge of town, and he never invited me inside, always picking me up at my parents' house and dropping me off there at the end of our evenings together. My father noticed the oddities too. "There's something that man isn't telling us," he said to my mother one night when he thought I was out of earshot. I was standing in the hallway outside their bedroom, frozen in place as I listened. "I don't trust men with secrets, Helen. They usually have good reasons for keeping them, and those reasons are rarely good for young girls like our Margaret." But my mother, ever the romantic, defended Robert. "He's been through loss, Thomas. His parents are both gone. Maybe he's just a private man who's learned to protect himself from more pain. We should give him the benefit of the doubt. He clearly cares for Margaret." And I did believe he cared for me. The way he looked at me, the tenderness in his touch when he helped me into his truck or took my hand during evening walks, the careful attention he paid to everything I said, all of it spoke of genuine affection. When he proposed on Christmas Eve of that same year, kneeling in my parents' living room in front of the decorated tree with a simple gold band he'd saved 3 months to buy, I didn't hesitate before saying yes. My father's concerns were forgotten in the joy of the moment, in the excitement of planning a wedding and imagining the life I'd build with this man I'd grown to love so completely. We married on Valentine's Day of 1957 in a small ceremony at First Baptist Church. I wore my mother's wedding dress, altered to fit my smaller frame, and carried a bouquet of white roses that Robert had ordered specially from a florist in Louisville. Only immediate family attended, along with a few of my friends from church and my coworker Patricia. Robert had no guests on his side, no friends or distant relatives to fill the pews. When the pastor asked who gave this woman to be married, my father stepped forward with tears in his eyes and placed my hand in Robert's. I thought I saw hesitation in my father's face, a moment of doubt before he returned to his seat beside my mother, but I dismissed it as natural paternal anxiety about giving away his daughter. Our honeymoon was a weekend trip to Louisville, where we stayed in a modest hotel and visited the zoo and the botanical gardens. Robert was attentive and gentle, making sure I was comfortable with every step of our new intimacy. But even then, even in those private moments that should have been entirely ours, I sensed something held back in him, some part of himself he wouldn't or couldn't share with me. I told myself it was just his nature, that some people are naturally more reserved, that love would eventually unlock whatever doors he kept closed. We settled into married life in a small house Robert had rented on Willow Street, a white clapboard cottage with a front porch and a backyard where I immediately began planning a vegetable garden. I continued working at the courthouse for the first few months, saving money for furniture and household necessities. Robert continued his surveying work, often leaving before dawn and returning after sunset, exhausted but always greeting me with a kiss and asking about my day. We fell into comfortable routines. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The small domesticities of married life that felt both thrilling and grounding. Our first child, a daughter we named Catherine, was born in November of 1958. She came into the world with a fierce cry and a full head of dark hair, looking more like her father than me from the very first moment. Robert held her with such wonder and terror in his eyes, cradling her tiny body against his chest as if she might shatter at the slightest pressure. "I'm a father," he whispered, more to himself than to me. "I have a daughter." The way he said it, with such profound amazement, made me realize he'd never truly believed this moment would come, that he'd somehow been living his life as if it were temporary, as if real happiness wasn't meant for men like him. 2 years later, our son Daniel arrived, completing our family in a way that felt almost too perfect. I quit my job at the courthouse to focus entirely on raising our children, throwing myself into motherhood with the same efficiency I'd once applied to filing legal documents. I joined the church women's auxiliary, hosted neighborhood coffee mornings, sewed my children's clothes, and kept our home spotless. Robert worked longer hours to compensate for my lost income, taking on extra surveying projects that sometimes kept him away for days at a time. But he always came home to us, always walked through the door with gifts for the children and flowers for me, always held me close at night and whispered that we were his whole world. The years passed in a blur of birthday parties and school concerts, of scraped knees and childhood illnesses, of holidays spent with my extended family and quiet evenings on our front porch watching the children catch fireflies in the summer twilight. By the time Catherine turned 10 and Daniel turned 8, I felt like I'd finally achieved the life I'd dreamed about as a young girl reading romance novels in my parents' house. We weren't wealthy, but we had enough. We weren't exciting, but we were happy. Or at least I thought we were. Looking back now with the perspective of decades, I can see the signs I missed or chose to ignore. The way Robert never wanted his photograph taken, always finding excuses to be behind the camera instead of in front of it. The complete absence of any mementos from his life before Riverside, no old photographs or yearbooks, no letters from childhood friends, nothing to prove he'd existed before I met him. The periodic trips he made to Louisville, always alone, always for vague business reasons, returning home quiet and withdrawn for days afterward. The locked box he kept in the back of our bedroom closet, a metal cash box with a key he carried on a chain around his neck, hidden beneath his shirt where I could feel it sometimes when we embraced but could never see. "What's in the box, Robert?" I asked him once, early in our marriage, trying to keep my tone light and curious rather than suspicious. "Just important papers," he replied, not meeting my eyes. "Boring legal things, property deeds and such. Nothing interesting, I promise." But if they were just boring papers, why keep them locked? Why carry the key so close to your heart like a talisman? I didn't push further then. I was young, trusting, raised to believe that wives should respect their husband's privacy and not pry into matters that didn't concern them. I told myself it didn't matter, that everyone deserved some small piece of themselves that remained theirs alone. The first real crack in my trust came in the spring of 1969, when Catherine was 10 and Daniel was 8. I was doing laundry, sorting through the pockets of Robert's work pants before washing them, when I found a receipt from a florist shop in Louisville. The receipt was dated from the previous week, when Robert had supposedly been there for a one-day surveying consultation. The amount listed was significant, more than he'd ever spent on flowers for me, and the delivery address was in Louisville, not Riverside. The flowers were sent to Evelyn Hartley at Shady Grove Nursing Home. Evelyn Hartley. The name echoed in my mind for days. Robert's mother had been named Mary, he'd told me. She died when he was 7. So who was Evelyn Hartley? An aunt? A distant relative he'd never mentioned? Or something else entirely? Someone whose existence contradicted the story he'd built our marriage upon? I wanted to confront him immediately, to demand answers, but something held me back. Maybe it was fear of what I might learn. Maybe it was the hope that there was an innocent explanation. Or maybe deep down I already knew that pulling on this particular thread might unravel everything. I put the receipt back exactly where I'd found it, washed the pants and said nothing. But I couldn't stop thinking about it. Couldn't stop imagining scenarios that grew more elaborate and troubling with each passing day. Was Robert visiting another family in Louisville? Did he have another wife, another set of children? Was our entire life together a lie? The questions consumed me, stealing my sleep and my appetite, making me irritable with the children and distant with my husband. Robert noticed my change in mood but misinterpreted it as female troubles or stress from managing the household. He responded with extra attention and gentleness, which only made my guilt at suspecting him feel heavier. Months passed. I found 2 more receipts from the same florist, both for deliveries to the same nursing home address. I began paying closer attention to Robert's comings and goings, noting the dates of his Louisville trips, observing how he acted before and after. He always seemed burdened before leaving, as if steeling himself for something difficult. And he always returned subdued, sometimes with red-rimmed eyes as if he'd been crying. But he never volunteered information about where he'd been or what he'd done, and I'd become too afraid of the answers to ask the questions. Then came February of 1973. Daniel was now 12, Catherine 14, both approaching the age where they noticed more than children should about the tensions between their parents. The distance between Robert and me had grown despite our efforts to maintain normalcy. We still shared a bed, still sat together at church, still presented ourselves to the world as a happily married couple. But the warmth between us had cooled, replaced by a careful politeness that felt more like the relationship between courteous strangers than intimate partners. It was a Saturday morning, unseasonably cold for February even in Kentucky. Robert had left before dawn for what he said would be a 3-day surveying project in the eastern part of the state. Catherine was at her friend Linda's house, and Daniel was in the backyard attempting to build a snow fort from the thin layer of snow that had fallen overnight. I had the house to myself for the first time in weeks, and I decided to use the rare solitude to do a deep cleaning, the kind that involved moving furniture and scrubbing baseboards and reorganizing closets. I started with our bedroom, stripping the bed and washing the windows, dusting the dresser and nightstands. Then I moved to the closet, pulling out boxes of old clothes to sort through and donate. At the back of the closet's top shelf, behind a stack of Robert's winter sweaters, my fingers brushed against something I'd forgotten existed. The metal cash box. Robert's locked box of important papers. The box he always kept secured, the key he always wore around his neck. Except today, in his hurry to leave before dawn, he'd forgotten it. I'd felt the absence of the chain when he'd kissed me goodbye, noticed the unusual lightness when he'd pulled me close, but I'd been half asleep and hadn't thought much of it. Now, as I lifted the box down from the shelf, I realized he must have left the key on his dresser or in his truck. I should have put it back. I should have respected his privacy, trusted that whatever was inside was exactly what he'd always claimed it was, boring legal papers and property deeds. But holding that box in my hands, feeling its surprising weight, knowing that after 17 years of marriage, I still didn't know what my husband considered important enough to lock away, I couldn't resist. I tried to convince myself I'd just peek, just satisfy my curiosity enough to silence the questions that had haunted me for years. It wouldn't hurt anything if he never knew I'd looked. I took the box to the kitchen, set it on the table, and examined the lock. It was a simple mechanism, not particularly sophisticated. In movies, people picked locks with hairpins, but I'd never learned such skills. I tried a few kitchen utensils, a paring knife, a skewer, a screwdriver from the junk drawer, but nothing worked. The lock remained stubbornly closed. I was about to give up and return the box to its hiding place when I remembered my father's old toolbox in the basement, left here when my parents had downsized to a smaller house 5 years earlier. Among those tools was a small crowbar. The metal gave way easier than I expected when I pried at the lock. The box wasn't built to withstand serious force, just to provide basic security against casual inspection. The lock broke with a sharp crack that made me flinch, even though I was alone in the house. I'd crossed a line I couldn't uncross. Robert would know I'd opened his box. There would be a confrontation, a reckoning. But now that I'd gone this far, I had to see what was inside. I had to know what secret was worth 17 years of locked boxes and carried keys. I lifted the lid slowly, my hands trembling so badly I almost dropped it. Inside were papers, just as Robert had always said. But they weren't boring property deeds or legal documents. They were letters, dozens of them, tied with faded blue ribbon. Beneath the letters were photographs, old and yellowed with age. And tucked into the very bottom was a folded document that, when I opened it, revealed itself to be a marriage certificate. Robert James Hartley and Evelyn Louise Patterson, married June 14, 1946, in Louisville, Kentucky. 1946. 10 years before I met him. The room spun around me. I gripped the edge of the table to steady myself, trying to process what I was seeing. Robert had been married before. He'd had a wife named Evelyn, and he'd never told me. He'd claimed to have no family, no close connections, nothing and no one in his past worth mentioning. But here was proof of a whole life he'd hidden from me. A whole person whose existence rewrote everything I thought I knew about my husband. With shaking hands, I picked up one of the letters and unfolded it. The handwriting was feminine, delicate and slanted, written in faded blue ink on thin paper. "My dearest Robert," it began. "The doctors say I had a good week. I remembered your visit yesterday, recognized your face when you walked in. That doesn't happen often anymore, as you know. I cherish these moments of clarity, these brief returns to myself." The date at the top was just 3 weeks ago. 3 weeks ago, while I'd been making dinner for our children and planning Catherine's upcoming birthday party, Robert had been in Louisville visiting another woman. A woman who wrote to him as dearest, who treasured his visits, who struggled with some kind of illness that affected her memory and recognition. I read letter after letter, each one a small window into a relationship I'd never known existed. The letters spanned years dating back to the early 1960s, becoming more disjointed and confused as time progressed. In the earlier letters, Evelyn wrote coherently about her days at the nursing home, about the other residents and the staff, about books she was reading and meals she'd eaten. She wrote about missing Robert, about looking forward to his visits, about her gratitude for his continued presence in her life. But the later letters were different, fragmented and sometimes nonsensical, jumping from topic to topic without clear connections, sometimes addressing Robert by other names or confusing him with people from her past. The photograph showed a young woman with soft eyes and a gentle smile, her arm linked with Robert's in what was clearly a wedding photo. Robert looked almost the same as I'd known him, maybe a bit younger, but the expression on his face was different. He was smiling fully, genuinely, with none of the sadness I'd seen in his eyes when we met. Other photos showed the couple in various settings, on what appeared to be a honeymoon at Niagara Falls, in front of a small house with a white picket fence, sitting together on a porch swing. In every image they looked happy, completely and utterly happy. At the bottom of the box, beneath everything else, I found a small envelope that felt different from the letters. It was sealed, addressed to nobody, marked only with the words "in case of my death," in Robert's handwriting. My heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears, I broke the seal and pulled out a single sheet of paper. What I read made me sink into the kitchen chair, all strength leaving my legs. The letter was dated December 1956, just days before Robert proposed to me. It was written like a confession, like someone unburdening their soul before stepping into the unknown. To whoever finds this, it began. "My name is Robert James Hartley, and I am about to commit a sin that I pray God will someday forgive. I am about to marry a woman named Margaret Brennan while my legal wife, Evelyn, still lives. I love Margaret desperately, but she does not know the truth about my past. She believes I am a widower with no family, and I have allowed her to believe this lie because I am a coward who cannot bear to be alone." The letter went on to explain everything. How Robert had married Evelyn in 1946, right after returning from the war. How they'd been happy for 3 years, planning to start a family. How Evelyn had become pregnant in 1949, and how the pregnancy had triggered something terrible in her mind. She began hearing voices, he wrote, seeing things that weren't there. The doctors called it a nervous breakdown brought on by hormonal changes. They said it would pass after the baby came, but it didn't pass. She lost the baby at 6 months and she lost herself too. She tried to harm herself 3 times. I had her committed to Shady Grove for her own protection, and I've visited her every week for 7 years now. She doesn't know me most days. The doctors say she'll never recover. I tried to be faithful, the letter continued. I tried to keep my vows, to be the husband she deserved even though she doesn't remember having a husband. But the loneliness was destroying me. I was drowning in it, becoming a shadow of myself. Then I met Margaret, and she was like sunlight breaking through clouds. She made me remember what it felt like to be alive, to have hope for the future. I know it's wrong. I know I should tell her the truth, that I'm technically still married, that I can never truly be hers alone. But I'm selfish and desperate and so very tired of being alone. I'm going to marry her and try to make her happy, Try to give her the life she deserves while still caring for Evelyn as long as she lives. God forgive me for this deception. God help me be worthy of Margaret's love despite this terrible secret I'm keeping. I sat at that kitchen table for I don't know how long, the letter clutched in my hands, tears streaming down my face. 17 years. 17 years of marriage built on a foundation of lies. I wasn't Robert's wife, not really. I was his second chance, his escape from loneliness, his selfish grasp at happiness while his real wife lived forgotten in a nursing home. Everything I'd believed about our life together was false. The courtship, the proposal, the wedding, the children, all of it contaminated by this fundamental dishonesty. The sound of the back door opening snapped me out of my spiral. Daniel came bursting in, his cheeks red from the cold, his clothes damp from playing in the snow. "Mom, I'm freezing, can I have hot chocolate?" he asked, then stopped short when he saw my face. "Mom, what's wrong? Why are you crying?" I quickly wiped my tears and tried to compose myself, but my voice came out strangled. "Nothing, sweetheart. I'm fine. Just feeling a bit emotional today. Go change into dry clothes and I'll make you hot chocolate." He studied me with concern beyond his 12 years, clearly not believing my reassurance, but he obeyed and headed to his room. I quickly gathered all the papers and photographs, shoving them back into the broken box. I couldn't let the children see this, couldn't let them know what I'd discovered until I figured out what to do with this information. I carried the box to my bedroom and hid it under the bed, then splashed cold water on my face and forced myself to go through the motions of normal afternoon routines. I made Daniel's hot chocolate, started preparing dinner, helped Catherine with her homework when she came home. But inside I was screaming. Inside I was falling apart. That night I couldn't sleep. I lay in the bed I'd shared with Robert for 17 years, staring at the ceiling, replaying every moment of our relationship through this new lens of truth. Every tender word he'd spoken was now suspect. Every promise he'd made was built on lies. Every time he'd told me he loved me, there'd been an invisible woman standing between us, a legal wife whose existence invalidated everything we'd built together. How could he do this? How could he look at me every day, father our children, build this life with me, all while keeping such a monumental secret? And Evelyn, poor Evelyn, suffering alone in that nursing home, her mind broken, her husband visiting faithfully, but living an entirely separate life with another woman. Did she ever have moments of clarity where she wondered about the life she'd lost? Did she ever ask Robert about having children, about building the future they'd planned? Or was she so far gone that she'd forgotten she'd ever been married at all? The cruelty of it all, the betrayal not just of me but of her, made me physically ill. I barely made it to the bathroom before vomiting. Over the next few days I moved through life like an automaton, going through all the expected motions while my mind churned with impossible questions. Should I confront Robert when he returned? Should I leave him, take the children and file for divorce? But was I even married to him legally? Could you divorce someone you were never actually married to? Should I tell my parents, seek advice from my father who'd suspected Robert from the beginning? Or would that humiliate them, prove them right about the man they'd reluctantly accepted as their son-in-law? And what about Catherine and Daniel? How could I explain this to them? How could I tell them their father was not who they thought he was, that their family was built on a foundation of deception? The weight of the secret pressed down on me until I could barely breathe. I understood now why Robert had carried that box locked, why he'd kept the key close to his heart. Some truths are too heavy to share, too dangerous to expose. They have the power to destroy everything. And yet, now that I knew I couldn't unknow it, the truth had wormed its way into my consciousness, poisoning every memory, casting shadows over every happy moment we'd ever shared. Robert returned from his surveying trip on Tuesday evening, tired and dirty from 3 days in the field. He greeted me with his usual kiss, hugged the children, and went to shower before dinner. I watched him move through our home, this man I'd loved for so long, and I felt like I was seeing a stranger. The key was back around his neck, I noticed, the chain glinting beneath his shirt collar. He must have realized he'd forgotten it the morning he left, but by then it was too late to turn back. Had he worried during those 3 days about what might happen if I found the box? Or had he trusted me completely, believed I would never violate his privacy even if given the opportunity? During dinner he told us stories about the surveying project, making the children laugh with his descriptions of getting stuck in mud, and dealing with an ornery farmer who didn't want his land measured. He was the same Robert he'd always been, attentive and kind, asking the children about their schoolwork and complimenting my cooking. If I hadn't known better, I would have thought everything was perfectly normal. But I did know better now. I knew that beneath the surface of this ordinary family dinner, beneath the laughter and the mundane conversations, lay a truth that would shatter us all if brought into the light. After the children went to bed, Robert and I sat together in the living room as we always did, him reading the newspaper while I pretended to work on mending a torn shirt. The silence between us felt different now, charged with everything I knew and everything he didn't know I knew. Several times I almost spoke, almost opened my mouth to say, "I found your box, I know about Evelyn, tell me the truth." But each time fear stopped me. Fear of his reaction, fear of what would happen next, fear of the life I might be about to lose. "Robert," I finally said, my voice coming out smaller than I intended. He looked up from his newspaper, his reading glasses sliding down his nose. "Yes, Margaret? Is everything all right? You seem troubled. Have I done something wrong?" The genuine concern in his voice almost broke me. He cared about me, I could see that clearly. Whatever else was true, his feelings for me were real. But feelings built on lies, no matter how genuine, were still corrupted at their foundation. "I need to ask you something," I continued, my heart racing. "And I need you to be completely honest with me." His expression shifted subtly, a wariness entering his eyes. "Of course," he said, folding the newspaper and giving me his full attention. "You can ask me anything, Margaret. You know that." But even as he said it, I could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his hand unconsciously moved to touch the chain around his neck where the key hung hidden beneath his shirt. He knew something was coming. Maybe he'd been expecting this conversation for 17 years, dreading it, preparing for it. I took a deep breath, gathering my courage. "Is there anything about your past, about your life before we met, that you haven't told me? Anything important that I should know?" The color drained from Robert's face. For a long moment he didn't speak, didn't move, just stared at me with an expression I couldn't read. Then slowly he reached beneath his shirt and pulled out the chain. The key dangled from it, catching the light from the lamp beside his chair. "You found the box," he said quietly. It wasn't a question. I didn't bother to deny it. "Yes," I admitted. "You forgot your key when you left for your trip. The box was in the closet." I opened it. His eyes closed, pain etching lines deep into his face. He suddenly looked much older than his 45 years. "Oh, Margaret," he whispered. "Oh God, Margaret. I'm so sorry." The silence that followed Robert's admission stretched between us like an unbridgeable canyon. "I'm so sorry" echoed in my ears, but the words felt inadequate for the magnitude of what he'd done, for the 17 years of deception that had just been laid bare between us. I sat there in the living room, the mending forgotten in my lap, watching this man I thought I knew struggle to find words that could somehow explain the unexplainable. "Tell me everything," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "Not the sanitized version. Not the edited story you've been telling for almost 2 decades. I want the complete truth, Robert. All of it. Every single detail you've been hiding from me since the day we met." He nodded slowly, his hands trembling as he removed his reading glasses and set them on the side table. He looked exhausted, as if he'd been carrying an impossible weight for so long that the relief of finally setting it down was almost as painful as the burden itself. "Evelyn and I met in 1945, he began, his voice barely above a whisper. "I'd just come home from the war, stationed in France for 2 years with the Army Corps of Engineers. I was 23 years old, shell-shocked though we didn't call it that then, trying to figure out how to be a civilian again after seeing the things I'd seen. She was working as a librarian in Louisville, the most beautiful woman I'd ever laid eyes on. She had this way of moving through the world like everything around her was precious and fragile, like she was constantly amazed by the simple act of being alive." I watched Robert's face transform as he spoke about Evelyn, saw the ghost of the young man he'd been appear in his features. It hurt to see that expression, that unguarded tenderness for another woman, but I forced myself to listen without interruption. "We married quickly," he continued. "Too quickly maybe, but that's what everyone did back then. The war had taught us that life was short and uncertain, that you had to grab happiness when you found it because tomorrow it might be gone. We moved into a small apartment above a drugstore, And for 3 years we were happy. Genuinely, completely happy. She wanted children desperately, talked about having a whole house full of them. When she got pregnant in 1949, we were over the moon. We'd been trying for almost 2 years, and we'd started to worry that maybe it wasn't meant to happen. But then it did, and everything seemed perfect. We found a little house to rent, started buying furniture and baby clothes, picked out names. We were going to call him James if it was a boy, after my father. Elizabeth if it was a girl, after her mother. Robert's voice cracked, and he paused to wipe his eyes. I'd seen him cry perhaps twice in all our years together, but now tears flowed freely down his weathered cheeks. But something went wrong around the 6th month, he said. Evelyn started having these episodes. She'd wake up screaming in the middle of the night, convinced that someone was trying to hurt the baby. She'd hear voices telling her terrible things. Awful things I can't even repeat. The doctor said it was just pregnancy nerves, that some women get emotional and anxious. He gave her pills to help her sleep, told her to rest more. We thought it would pass. We believed him when he said she'd be fine once the baby came. I could see where this was going, had already read pieces of this story in the letters I'd found, but hearing it from Robert's own mouth made it real in a way the written words hadn't. What happened to the baby? I asked, though I already knew the answer. He died, Robert said flatly. She went into early labor at 26 weeks. They couldn't stop it. Our son lived for about 2 hours, just long enough for me to hold him, to see that he had Evelyn's nose in my hands. The nurses baptized him before he passed. We buried him in a plot at Cave Hill Cemetery. Just a tiny grave with a tiny headstone. And Evelyn? I prompted when he fell silent, lost in memories I could never access. She broke completely, he said. The day after the baby died, she tried to throw herself out the hospital window. They had to restrain her, sedate her heavily. When they finally let her come home 2 weeks later, she wasn't the same person anymore. She didn't speak for days at a time. When she did talk, it was to people who weren't there, having conversations with our dead son or her mother who'd passed when she was a teenager. She'd forget to eat, forget to bathe. I had to watch her constantly because she kept trying to hurt herself. Robert got up from his chair and began pacing, unable to sit still with the weight of these memories. I took a leave from work, he said, to care for her full time. Used up all our savings paying for doctors and specialists. Everyone had a different diagnosis, a different treatment to try. Some said it was grief-induced psychosis that would fade with time. Others said it was schizophrenia triggered by the trauma. One doctor even suggested she was possessed and recommended we see a priest. Nothing worked. If anything, she got worse. The hallucinations became more vivid, more terrifying for her. She stopped recognizing me altogether, would scream when I tried to touch her, call me by her father's name or her brother's name, anyone but her husband. How long did you try to care for her at home? I asked, needing to understand the timeline to map out exactly when and how my husband had made the choices that led us to this moment. Almost 2 years, he answered. From the summer of 1949 until the spring of 1951. I couldn't work, couldn't leave her alone for even a few minutes. We lost the house we'd rented, had to move back to my father's place here in Riverside. He helped as much as he could, but he was getting older, and Evelyn's condition frightened him. The final straw came when she attacked me with a kitchen knife, convinced I was an intruder trying to harm her. She didn't mean it, wasn't even seeing me as me, but the doctors said she was a danger to herself and others. They said the only option was long-term psychiatric care at a facility. So you had her committed to Shady Grove, I said, filling in the gap. Yes, he confirmed. In May of 1951. It was the hardest decision I've ever made, Margaret. I felt like I was abandoning her, betraying the vows I'd made. For better or worse, in sickness and in health. She was sick and I was putting her away. But the doctors assured me it was the best thing, the only thing. They said the facility could provide care I couldn't, treatments that might help her recover. Robert laughed bitterly. Recover? That word became such a cruel joke. She never recovered, never even showed significant improvement. Some days she'd have moments of clarity where she'd know me, ask about her mother or our apartment, seemingly unaware that years had passed. But those moments became rarer and rarer. And you visited her, I said, thinking of the letters I'd read, the receipts I'd found over the years. Every single week for 7 years, he said. Every Sunday afternoon without fail. I'd sit with her even when she didn't know who I was. read to her, tell her about my week, bring her violets because those were always her favorite flower. I kept hoping that one day she'd wake up, that the doctors would find some new treatment, some miracle cure. I kept believing that my Evelyn was still in there somewhere, trapped inside a broken mind, waiting to be freed. The room felt smaller suddenly, the walls pressing in as I tried to process what I was hearing. So when you met me in 1956, I said slowly, working through the timeline, you've been visiting Evelyn every week for 5 years. You were still married to her, still legally her husband, still hoping she might recover. He nodded miserably. Yes, he whispered. To all of that, yes. I was a married man when I walked into that courthouse and saw you behind your desk on your 19th birthday. I was a married man when I asked you to dinner, when I courted you, when I proposed. I was a married man on our wedding day, standing in that church and making vows I had no legal right to make. Why? I asked, the word coming out harsh and sharp. Why do that to me, Robert? Why not just tell me the truth? Why not give me the choice about whether I wanted to be involved with a married man? He sank back into his chair, looking defeated and small. Because I was drowning, Margaret. Because I'd spent 5 years living between my father's house and that nursing home, working just enough to pay Evelyn's care costs, watching the woman I loved fade away piece by piece while I faded right along with her. I was becoming a ghost, going through the motions of living without actually being alive. And then I saw you, so young and vibrant and full of hope, and I wanted that. God help me, I wanted to feel alive again. That's not an excuse, I said coldly. That's just selfishness. Yes, he agreed immediately. You're absolutely right. It was selfish and wrong and cowardly. I convinced myself that it would be okay, that Evelyn was so far gone she'd never know, that I deserved some happiness after everything I'd been through. I told myself that technically our marriage had ended when her mind broke, that the woman I'd married didn't exist anymore, that I was free to build a new life. But those were all lies I told myself to justify what I knew was wrong. And what about after we married? I pressed. What about when Catherine was born, when Daniel came along? At what point did you think maybe you should tell me the truth? Every single day, he said with surprising vehemence. Every morning when I woke up next to you, every night when I kissed you goodnight, every time I held our children, I thought about telling you. I'd rehearse the words in my head, plan out exactly how I'd explain it. But then I'd imagine your face when you learned the truth, imagine you taking the children and leaving, imagine losing everything I'd built with you, and I couldn't do it. I was a coward, Margaret. I chose my own comfort, my own happiness over your right to know the truth. The confession letter, I said, remembering the folded paper I'd found at the bottom of the box. The one that said in case of my death. When did you write that? The week before I proposed to you, he admitted. I was terrified something would happen to me, that you'd find out about Evelyn after I was gone and have no way to understand why I'd done what I did. I wanted there to be some explanation, some record of my reasoning, even if it couldn't justify my actions. It was the least I could do, leaving you some truth even if I couldn't give it to you while I was alive. I felt numb, overwhelmed by the sheer scope of his deception. In the box, I said. All those letters from Evelyn, all those photographs. Why keep them? Why not destroy the evidence? He looked at me as if I'd suggested something unthinkable. Because they're all I have left of who she was, he said. Because even though I chose to build a life with you, I couldn't forget her, couldn't pretend she never existed. Those letters, scattered and confused as they became, they're proof that she's still a person. Still someone who deserves to be remembered and visited and cared for. The photos remind me of who she was before the illness, keep me from forgetting that she was more than just a patient in a nursing home. So you've been living 2 lives all this time, I said, the full reality of it hitting me. Husband to me and the children here in Riverside, devoted caretaker to Evelyn in Louisville. Never fully present in either place, always divided. Always carrying the weight of this secret. It must have been exhausting. It was, he said simply. It is. Margaret, I can't tell you how many times I've wanted to just confess everything, to stop living this double life. But the longer it went on, the harder it became to find the right moment, the right words. And I was terrified of losing you, of destroying what we'd built together. Well, you're going to lose me now, I said, the words coming out cold and final. Because I can't stay married to a man who isn't actually my husband, who's been lying to me since the moment we met. Our entire life together is built on deception, Robert. Our marriage isn't even legal. Our children, I stopped, the realization hitting me like a physical blow. Oh God, Robert. What does this mean for Catherine and Daniel? Are they even legitimate? Can you understand what you've done to them with your lies? His face went even paler if that was possible. They're mine, he said desperately. Biologically, legally, they're my children no matter what. The marriage might not be valid, but they are. No one can take that away from them or us. But their birth certificates list you as my wife, I said, thinking through the implications. Their school records, every official document. It all says their parents are Robert and Margaret Hartley, married couple. What happens when people find out the truth? What happens to them? We can fix this, Robert said, standing up and moving toward me. I stopped him with a raised hand. Don't, I said sharply. Don't come near me right now. I can't bear to have you touch me. He froze, pain etched across his features. Margaret, please. We can fix this. Evelyn's doctors have said for years that she's declining, that she probably won't live much longer. The disease is progressing, affecting her body now, not just her mind. When she passes, and I know how terrible this sounds, but when she passes we can remarry properly. We can make everything legal and right. When she passes, I repeated, disgust rising in my throat. You're talking about your wife dying like it's a solution to a problem, like she's an obstacle to be removed rather than a human being. Do you even hear yourself, Robert? Do you understand how monstrous that sounds? That's not what I meant, he protested. I'm not wishing for her death, Margaret. I'm just being realistic about her prognosis. The doctors have said she has maybe a year or two at most. Her body is shutting down. She doesn't eat unless they feed her through a tube. She doesn't know where or who she is anymore. She's not suffering if that's what you're worried about. She's beyond that now, beyond everything. I stood up, needing to put distance between us. I'm going to my parents' house, I announced. I need time to think, to figure out what to do about all of this. I'll take Catherine and Daniel with me. You can stay here, continue your life of lies and secrets. But don't follow us, Robert. Don't try to contact me until I'm ready to talk again. Margaret, wait, he pleaded. The children, they'll ask questions. They'll want to know why we're suddenly separating. What am I supposed to tell them? Tell them the truth, I snapped. Tell them their father is a liar and a bigamist who built their entire family on a foundation of deception. Or tell them whatever story you want. You're good at that, making up convenient narratives. I'm sure you'll think of something. I walked out of the living room and down the hall to the children's bedrooms. Catherine's door was closed, but I could see light under it. She was probably reading, as she often did before bed. Daniel's room was dark, and when I opened his door quietly, I could hear his soft snoring. They were so innocent, so unaware that their world was about to be turned upside down. How could I protect them from this? How could I shield them from the truth about their father without becoming a liar myself? I decided to wait until morning to tell them we were leaving. They needed one more night of peace, one more night of believing their family was normal and stable. I went to the bedroom I'd shared with Robert for 17 years and began pulling clothes from the closet, packing them into the same suitcase I'd used for our honeymoon trip to Louisville. The irony wasn't lost on me. That trip had been to the same city where his real wife lived in a nursing home, probably just miles from the hotel where we'd consummated our invalid marriage. Robert appeared in the doorway as I was packing. Please don't do this, he said. Please don't take the children and leave. We can work through this together. There's nothing to work through, I said without looking at him. You made your choices 17 years ago when you decided to lie to me. You made them every single day since then when you woke up and chose to continue the deception. Now I'm making my choice, and my choice is to leave. What about the children? He asked. They need their father. They need stability and routine. You're going to traumatize them by ripping them away from their home, from everything they know. Don't you dare, I said, whirling to face him. Don't you dare try to make me the villain in this situation. You traumatized them the moment you decided to build a family on lies. You destroyed their stability when you married their mother illegally. Any pain they feel now is a direct result of your actions, not mine. He flinched as if I'd struck him. You're right, he said quietly. This is all my fault. I love them so much, Margaret. I love all of you so much. Whatever else you believe, please believe that. Love isn't enough, I said, closing the suitcase with more force than necessary. Love without honesty is just manipulation. Love without respect is just selfishness. You may have feelings for us, Robert, but you don't love us the way we deserve to be loved. Because real love doesn't lie. Real love doesn't deceive. Real love gives the other person a choice. I carried the suitcase past him, down the hall to the room that had served as my sewing room. I'd sleep there tonight on the small daybed I kept for when my mother visited. Tomorrow I'd take the children and leave, figure out the next steps from the safety of my parents' house. Sleep didn't come easily that night. I lay on the narrow bed, staring at the ceiling, my mind racing through 17 years of memories now tainted by the knowledge of Robert's deception. Every tender moment, every shared laugh, every milestone with the children, all of it was shadowed by the invisible presence of Evelyn. She'd been there all along, a ghost haunting our marriage, a wife who had more legal claim to my husband than I did. The thought made me feel sick, made me want to scrub my skin clean of every touch Robert had ever given me. At some point in the early morning hours, I must have drifted off because I woke to pale sunlight streaming through the window and the sound of Catherine and Daniel moving around the house, getting ready for church. Sunday. Of course it was Sunday. The day we always spent as a family, attending services and then having lunch together before the children did homework and Robert read the newspaper. But there would be no normal Sunday routine today. Today everything would change. I got up, splashed cold water on my face, and went to find the children. They were in the kitchen, Catherine making toast while Daniel poured cereal. Robert was nowhere to be seen. His truck was gone from the driveway, I noticed through the window. He'd left before any of us woke up, probably unable to face what was coming. "Where's Dad?" Catherine asked when she saw me. "I don't know," I answered honestly. "But we need to talk. Both of you sit down, please." They exchanged worried glances, picking up on the seriousness in my tone. They sat at the kitchen table, breakfast forgotten, looking at me with identical expressions of concern. "I'm not going to lie to you," I began, sitting down across from them. "Your father and I are having some very serious problems. We need some time apart to figure things out. So we're going to stay with Grandma and Grandpa for a while." "For how long?" Daniel asked, his voice small. "I don't know yet, sweetheart. Maybe a few weeks, maybe longer. We'll have to see." "But what about school?" Catherine protested. "And my piano lessons? And Daniel's baseball practice? We can't just leave everything." "I know this is difficult and confusing," I said, reaching across to take both their hands. "But sometimes grown-ups have to make hard decisions. Your father and we've discovered some things that we need to work through, and we can't do that while all living under the same roof. But none of this is your fault, and both of us love you very much." "What things?" Catherine pressed, her 14-year-old mind already sensing there was more to this than a simple marital spat. "What did you discover?" "That's between your father and me," I said gently. "When the time is right, we'll explain everything to you. But right now, I need you both to trust me and understand that this is what needs to happen." "Did Dad do something bad?" Daniel asked, his eyes wide. "Did he hurt you?" "No," I assured him quickly. "He didn't hurt me physically. But yes, he did something that broke my trust in him. Something that makes it impossible for us to continue living together right now." The children looked at each other again, having one of those silent conversations that siblings share. Finally, Catherine nodded. "Okay, Mom. We'll go with you. But you have to promise us that you'll tell us the truth eventually. We're not little kids anymore. We deserve to know what's happening to our family." "I promise," I said, even though I had no idea how I would ever explain this situation to them in a way that wouldn't shatter their image of their father completely. "Go pack bags with enough clothes and things for a week or two. We'll leave as soon as you're ready." They went to their rooms, moving slowly as if in a dream. I heard Catherine crying softly through her closed door and Daniel throwing things around in his room, expressing his confusion and anger through physical action. I wanted to go to them, comfort them, but I knew I had nothing to offer right now except my own pain and anger. Instead, I went back to gathering my own things, collecting toiletries from the bathroom, photos of the children from the living room, small items that would make my parents' house feel less temporary. As I was taking a framed photo of Catherine's first birthday off the mantel, I noticed Robert's Bible sitting on the shelf below. The large black leather Bible his father had given him, the one he read from every morning before work. On impulse, I picked it up and opened it. Inside the front cover was an inscription in faded ink. "To my son Robert on his confirmation day." May God's word guide you always and keep you on the path of righteousness. With love, Father. The date was 1938, when Robert would have been just 16. I flipped through the pages, noticing verses that Robert had underlined over the years. Passages about forgiveness, about redemption, about bearing burdens and seeking grace. Had he been reading these verses to comfort himself about his deception? Had he been asking God to forgive him for the lies he was living every day? There, tucked into the book of Matthew, I found another piece of paper. Unlike the confession letter I'd found in the metal box, this one wasn't sealed or hidden. It was just a simple note, written in Robert's handwriting, dated just 2 weeks ago. Lord, give me the courage to tell her the truth before she discovers it herself. Give me the words to explain why I did what I did. Help her to forgive me, and if she cannot, give me the strength to accept the consequences of my sins. Help me be the man she deserves, even if I must do it from a distance. The prayer made my chest ache. He'd known this day was coming, had been anticipating it, dreading it. Maybe some part of him had even wanted it to come, wanted the burden of secrecy finally lifted even if it meant losing everything. I put the Bible back on the shelf, but I kept the prayer, folding it carefully and tucking it into my pocket. I didn't know why I kept it, what possible use it could serve. Maybe I just needed proof that Robert's guilt was real, that he hadn't been completely unaware of the pain his lies would cause. By mid-morning we were ready to leave. Catherine and Daniel carried their bags to my car, their faces reflecting a mix of sadness and confusion. I made one last walk through the house, checking that I hadn't forgotten anything essential. In the bedroom I noticed Robert's reading glasses on the nightstand, the book he'd been reading still open where he'd left it. Next to the lamp was our wedding photo, the two of us young and hopeful, completely unaware that the ceremony we were participating in had no legal validity whatsoever. I picked up the photo, studying Robert's face from 17 years ago. Had he felt guilty standing at that altar, making vows he had no right to make? Or had he convinced himself so thoroughly that it was okay, that Evelyn's illness had somehow dissolved their marriage, that he'd felt justified in what he was doing? I never know for certain. I could ask him, could listen to his explanations and justifications, but I'd never truly understand how a person makes the choice to build an entire life on a lie. Mom, are you coming? Catherine called from the front door. We're ready. I put the photo face down on the dresser, unable to look at those naive younger versions of ourselves any longer, and walked out of the bedroom, out of the house on Willow Street, out of the life I'd thought was mine but which had never been quite real. As I pulled out of the driveway with the children in the back seat, I saw Mrs. Patterson from next door watching from her window, her expression curious. By tomorrow the whole neighborhood would be buzzing with gossip about the Hartleys' separation. By next week, it would spread through all of Riverside. In a town this small, secrets never stayed secret for long. The drive to my parents' house took 15 minutes, but it felt like crossing into another country, another lifetime. When I pulled into their driveway, my mother was already standing on the front porch, as if she'd sensed our coming. She took one look at my face, at the children's bags, at the defeated slump of my shoulders, and knew immediately that something terrible had happened. "Oh, Margaret," she said, pulling me into her arms as the children carried their bags inside. "Oh, my dear girl. What did he do?" "Everything," I whispered into her shoulder, finally allowing myself to break down. "He did everything wrong, Mama. And I don't know how to fix it. I don't even know if it can be fixed." We stood there on the porch while I cried 17 years worth of tears, mourning not just for the marriage I was leaving but for the marriage I'd never actually had, for the legal wife I'd never been, for the truth I'd never been given the chance to choose. The weeks at my parents' house blurred together into a haze of sleepless nights and forced normalcy during the days. Catherine and Daniel adjusted better than I expected, though I caught them whispering together late at night, trying to piece together what had torn our family apart. My father said nothing about the situation, but his jaw stayed tight whenever Robert's name came up. My mother brought me tea and sat with me in silence, understanding that sometimes there are no words adequate for certain kinds of pain. Robert called twice a day, every day. I never answered. He sent letters that I burned without reading. He showed up at my parents' house 3 times in the first 2 weeks, and each time my father turned him away at the door. The 4th time he came, I finally agreed to see him, not because I'd forgiven him but because the children were asking questions I couldn't keep avoiding. We met at the park downtown, neutral territory where neither of us had claim to the memories. He looked terrible, like he hadn't slept or eaten properly since I'd left. Good, I thought bitterly. Let him suffer a fraction of what he's put me through. We sat on a bench far from the playground where other families laughed and played, their happiness a painful contrast to our misery. Evelyn died 4 days ago, he said without preamble. The words hung in the air between us, and I didn't know what I was supposed to feel. Relief that the obstacle to a legal marriage was gone? Grief for a woman I'd never met? Anger that even her death felt tainted by the circumstances? I'm sorry, I finally said, because it seemed like the thing to say. For her, not for you. The funeral is tomorrow, he continued. In Louisville. I'd like you to come with me if you're willing. I want you to see where she's buried, to understand that part of my life. I almost refused outright, but something in his haunted expression stopped me. Maybe I needed this too. Needed to see the final chapter of the story that had destroyed my marriage. I'll come, I agreed. But this doesn't change anything between us, Robert. This doesn't fix what you broke. The drive to Louisville the next morning was silent except for the radio playing low. Robert had picked me up at dawn, both of us dressed in black, both of us trapped in our separate griefs. The cemetery was old and sprawling, filled with monuments that dated back 100 years. Evelyn's funeral was small, just Robert, myself, 2 nurses from Shady Grove, and a priest who'd never met her. As the priest spoke words about eternal rest and God's mercy, I found myself crying for this woman whose life had been stolen by illness, whose husband had tried to build a new life while she faded away in institutional care. After the service, Robert led me to another grave nearby, smaller and weathered by 2 decades of seasons. Our son, he said simply. James Robert Hartley, born and died September 19, 1949. I knelt by the tiny headstone, imagining the baby who'd lived just 2 hours, the child whose death had triggered his mother's descent into madness. This was Robert's greatest loss, I realized. Not just Evelyn, but the entire future they'd planned together, the family they'd never gotten to build. I visit them both now, Robert said quietly, every Sunday after church, just like I used to visit only her. Feels right somehow keeping them together. I stood up, brushing dirt from my knees. What do you want from me, Robert? Why did you bring me here? I need you to understand, he said desperately. I need you to see that I didn't do what I did out of cruelty or indifference. I was a broken man trying to survive, trying to find some reason to keep living after losing everything. When I met you, you gave me that reason. I know it was selfish, I know it was wrong, but I need you to understand why. Understanding doesn't equal forgiveness, I told him. I can see that you suffered, that you lost terribly. But that doesn't justify building a life with me on lies. You took away my choice, Robert. You decided for me that I'd be okay with this situation, that I wouldn't care about legality or honesty. You robbed me of 17 years of truth. He nodded, accepting the condemnation. I know, and I'll spend the rest of my life trying to make it right if you'll let me. Now that Evelyn has passed, we can marry legally. We can fix the paperwork, make everything official. The children won't be affected. We can rebuild, Margaret. We can start over with complete honesty. I looked at this man who'd shared my bed for 17 years, who'd fathered my children, who'd held me through illnesses and celebrated every joy. I still loved him, I realized with bitter clarity. Despite everything, despite the lies and the betrayal and the years of deception, some part of me still loved him. But love alone couldn't bridge the chasm his lies had created. I need time, I said finally. I need time to think about what I want, what's best for me and the children. I need to figure out if I can ever trust you again. Or if every moment we spend together will be shadowed by wondering what else you might be hiding. How much time? He asked. As much as I need, I replied. Days, weeks, months. Maybe forever. You don't get to rush this, Robert. You created this mess over 17 years. I'll take however long I need to decide if it can be cleaned up. He drove me back to Riverside in continued silence. When we reached my parents' house, he turned to me one last time. I love you, Margaret. I've loved you from the day I met you, and I'll love you until the day I die. That was never a lie, never a deception. Whatever else was false, that was always real. I got out of the car without responding, without looking back as he drove away. Inside, my mother was waiting with hot coffee and worried eyes. The children were at school, my father at work. It was just the two of us in the quiet kitchen where I'd eaten breakfast as a child. What are you going to do? My mother asked gently. I don't know, Mama, I admitted. Part of me wants to go back to try again now that there are no more secrets. But another part of me can't forget that he looked me in the eye for 17 years and lied. How do I get past that? How do I ever trust him again? My mother sipped her coffee, choosing her words carefully. Your father and I, we've been married 42 years. In all that time, he's never lied to me about anything important. But if he had, if I'd discovered some great deception, I'd have to ask myself this question. Was the man who lied to me the same as the man who's loved me all these years? Or are they two different people, the liar and the husband? Can I separate the sin from the sinner? Her wisdom settled over me like a blanket. I didn't have the answer yet, might not have it for a long time. But I knew I had to try to find it, for my sake and for the children's sake. 3 months passed before I made my decision. 3 months of therapy with a counselor in Louisville, of long talks with my pastor, of watching Catherine and Daniel struggle with the separation, of sleepless nights weighing my options. Robert kept his distance, respecting my requests for space, but he sent child support money regularly and asked to see the children on weekends. I allowed it, supervised by my father at first, then gradually trusting him alone with them as they begged me to let their dad back into their lives fully. It was Daniel who finally pushed me toward my decision. Mom, he said one evening as I tucked him into bed at my parents' house, I miss Dad. I miss our house and my room and everything being normal. I know he messed up, I know he hurt you, but he's still my dad. Doesn't that count for something? Out of the mouths of babes, as they say. Yes, I told him. Yes, that counts for a lot. I called Robert that night and asked him to meet me at our house, the one on Willow Street that had sat empty for 3 months. He arrived within 20 minutes. Hope and fear warring in his expression. I'm willing to try again, I told him as we stood in the living room where this had all unraveled. But we do this on my terms. We marry again, legally this time, with both of us knowing exactly what we're committing to. We see the counselor together weekly for as long as it takes. You transfer the house into my name alone. And if I ever discover you've lied to me about anything at all, I leave immediately and permanently. Do you understand? Yes, he said, tears streaming down his face. Yes to all of it. Thank you, Margaret. Thank you for giving me another chance. I don't deserve it, but I swear I'll spend the rest of my life proving I can be worthy of it. We remarried quietly at the courthouse 6 weeks later. Just a simple civil ceremony with my parents as witnesses. No white dress, no church bells, no pretense that this was a beginning rather than a continuation. Catherine and Daniel were overjoyed to move back home, to have their family reunited, even if they sensed it was different now, more fragile. The years that followed were not easy. Trust, once broken, doesn't simply heal because you will it to. There were moments when I'd catch Robert looking sad and distant, and I'd wonder if he was thinking of Evelyn, comparing me to the wife he'd loved and lost. There were nights when I'd wake in a panic, convinced he was keeping some new secret, hiding some new truth. The counseling helped, as did Robert's complete transparency about everything, showing me bank statements and schedules and inviting me to accompany him anywhere he went. Slowly, painfully, we rebuilt something new from the ruins of what we'd had. It wasn't the innocent, trusting love of our first 17 years. It was harder, more aware, scarred by knowledge of how fragile happiness can be. But it was real in a way our earlier relationship never had been, built on truth rather than omission, on choice rather than deception. We grew old together, Robert and I. We watched Catherine marry and have children of her own. We celebrated Daniel's graduation from college. We sat together on the porch of the house on Willow Street, now legally mine, and watched the seasons change. When Robert died last year at 74, I held his hand just as I'd held it on our second wedding day, on the births of our grandchildren, through all the years of our complicated, imperfect, painfully honest second chance. His last words to me were, "Thank you for forgiving me a real marriage finally. I hope I made you happy, Margaret. I hope I gave you even half the joy you gave me." Did he make me happy? That's complicated. He gave me children I adored, a home I loved, years of companionship and care. But he also gave me pain and doubt, and the knowledge that the person you love most can deceive you completely while looking you straight in the eye. Both things are true, and I've learned to hold them together, the love and the hurt, the gratitude and the anger, the forgiveness and the memory of betrayal. Now at 74, I share this story not as a tale of perfect reconciliation or easy forgiveness, but as a testament to the complicated nature of love and truth. Sometimes people do terrible things for understandable reasons. Sometimes love survives even catastrophic betrayal. Sometimes forgiveness is possible even when forgetting isn't. And sometimes the strongest marriages are the ones rebuilt from rubble, constructed carefully and consciously rather than assumed to be solid. I still visit Robert's grave every Sunday, and sometimes I stop by Evelyn's too, bringing flowers to the woman who was his first love, his legal wife, the ghost who haunted our marriage even after her death. I tell her I'm sorry for my part in it all, sorry that Robert's solution to his unbearable situation involved deceiving me and, in a way, abandoning her. I like to think she'd understand that wherever she is now, free from the illness that stole her life, she'd forgive us both. Life is messy and complicated, full of impossible choices and unintended consequences. We do the best we can with the options we're given, and we hope that love and forgiveness can carry us through the mistakes we inevitably make. That's all any of us can do, really. Keep loving, keep trying, keep choosing truth even when lies would be easier. And when we fall short, as we all do, hope that those we've hurt can find it in their hearts to give us another chance. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.